The Galactic Defense Coalition's charter was signed by representatives from 47 species. The Draxan Empire was history, replaced by free worlds working together. Lieutenant Yuna approached with the latest reports. "Sir, we're getting distress. Calls from the Outer Rim. Slavers." Juan smiled grimly. "Signal the fleet. Looks like the galaxy needs some more protection." As the human ships jumped to hyperspace, the stars themselves seemed to whisper, humanity had arrived. And the universe would never be the same. The end, it should be interesting. And every part should be engaging so the audience doesn't get bored. Also keep the wording simple and natural tone. Also make the script human-centric and don't give feel of AI generated. Also don't create violated content which can affect YouTube policy. Also don't use names like Marcus, Sarah, Emma, Jamal, Itziyat. The docking bay of the Morning Star had never seen anything like this before. 3 Kaleri representatives stood in the center of the room, looking around nervously at all the human equipment. They were tall, maybe 7 feet, with smooth purple skin and long tentacles where humans had arms. Their eyes were huge and dark, like they were built for seeing in dim light. Elder Vex was the oldest of the 3, his tentacles moving slowly as he tried to understand what he was seeing. Behind him stood 2 younger Kalari, probably military officers based on the way they carried themselves. But all 3 looked confused and maybe a little disappointed. "These are the Great Protectors," Vex whispered to his companions in their own language. The translation device on Lieutenant Mira's belt picked it up and converted it to English. "They look so ... tiny." Commander Juan tried not to smile. He understood why the aliens were confused. Humans were probably half the size of the Kaleri, and their ships weren't exactly impressive compared to what most spacefaring races used. But size wasn't everything. Captain June stepped forward, his boots clicking on the metal floor. He was a solid man in his 30s, the kind of person who looked calm even when everything was falling apart. "We got your message," he said, speaking slowly so the translator could keep up. "It came as fast as we could." The translation device made some weird beeping sounds as it worked on the alien language. Technology was amazing, but it wasn't perfect. Sometimes the words came out wrong, and sometimes the meaning got lost completely. "You came to help us?" Elder Vex's voice shook. "But you don't understand. The Draxan have an entire fleet. 200 ships, maybe more. Each one of their vessels is 3 times the size of your biggest ship." He gestured with his tentacles toward the docking bay walls as if he could point through them to where the enemy was coming from. "They have weapons that can crack planets. They have soldiers that live for war. They have never, ever been defeated." Younger Kalari officers nodded sadly. One of them spoke up. "Honored humans, we thank you for answering our call, but you should leave now while you still can. There is no shame in running from impossible odds." Before anyone could respond, Lieutenant Yuna's voice crackled over the intercom from the bridge. "Commander Juan, please report to the bridge immediately. We have a situation." Juan looked at Captain June. They both knew what that meant. "Elder Vex, would you and your people like to come with us? Should probably see this." The group made their way through the ship's corridors. The Kaleri had trouble with the human-sized doorways, having to duck their heads and fold their tentacles. The ship felt cramped with such large aliens aboard. When they reached the bridge, Yuna was hunched over her console, her face pale. "Sir, I'm reading massive energy signatures at the edge of the system. Whatever's coming our way, it's huge." She transferred the data to the main screen. Dots of light appeared, each one representing a ship, or so many dots that they looked like a swarm of angry bees. "That's them," whispered one of the younger Kalari. "The Draxan fleet." Elder Vex's tentacles drooped. "You see? Impossible. Even if you had 100 ships like this one, you couldn't win." Commander Juan stared at the screen for a long moment. The math was simple and brutal. For human ships against 200 Draxan vessels, any military computer would calculate. Their chances of survival at basically 0, but humans had never been good at accepting impossible odds. "How long until they arrive?" he asked. 6 hours? Maybe 7? Yuna replied. Juan nodded and turned to face the Kaleri delegation. "Elder Vex, with respect, you called for help. We're here to give it, but you'll die," Vex said softly. "Maybe. Juan admitted, but that's our choice to make. The main view screen on the bridge showed a sight that made everyone's blood run cold. Ships, hundreds of them. The Draxan fleet stretched across space like a moving wall of metal and death. Each vessel was massive, dark, and covered in weapon ports that glowed with a sickly green light. Lieutenant Day stood at his tactical station, running numbers that kept getting worse. He was a quiet guy, usually kept his thoughts to himself. But this time he couldn't help it. Sir, I'm looking at their fleet composition. Their smallest ship is twice the size of our biggest one. He pulled up holographic displays showing the comparison. The human ships looked like toys next to the Draxan vessels. According to my calculations, they have enough firepower to turn this entire planet into glass in about 15 minutes. Bridge fell silent except for the steady beeping of computers. Everyone knew what glass meant. When you hit a planet with that much energy, the surface literally melted and turned into a smooth, glassy wasteland. Nothing survived. No people. No animals, no plants, just empty dead rock. Commander Juan stood with his hands behind his back, staring at the approaching fleet. Lieutenant Yuna, any word from the Kalari evacuation ships? They're loading civilians as fast as they can, sir, but it's going to take days to get everyone off the planet. Yuna's voice was tight with stress, and even if they do, she didn't need to finish. Everyone understood. The Draxan weren't the type to just let ships full of refugees fly away. They'd hunt them down, follow them to whatever world they tried to hide on, and eventually they might find Earth. So evacuation isn't really an option, Juan said quietly. Captain Juan. June was checking his weapons panel for the 10th time in an hour. The numbers hadn't changed. 4 human ships with standard patrol weapons against 200 Draxan warships. Sir, I've run every scenario I can think of. Even if we had perfect luck, even if they made every mistake possible, we can't win this fight. Not the way they want to fight it, Juan agreed. The communication system crackled to life. The voice that came through was deep, rough, and completely confident. It was the voice of someone who had never lost a battle and didn't expect to start now. Human vessels. This is Commander Thax of the Draxan Imperial Fleet. You are trespassing in our conquest zone. Surrender immediately, and we will grant you quick deaths. Resist, and we will make your suffering legendary. The bridge crew exchanged looks. Quick deaths? Like that was supposed to be a generous offer. What's our response, sir? Asked Lieutenant. Mira. Juan walked over to the communication station, thought about his crew, young people who had signed up to explore space and keep the peace. He thought about the Kalari families huddled in shelters below, waiting to die. He thought about Earth, so far away and so vulnerable if these monsters ever found it. Open a channel, he said. The screen flickered and showed Commander Thax. He was exactly what you'd expect from a Draxan. Huge, covered in thick armor, with red eyes that seemed to glow in the dark. Scars covered his face, and when he smiled, his teeth looked like they were made for tearing flesh. Have you come to surrender, little human? Juan looked right back at him. I've got a message for you, Commander. Speak. Juan's voice was calm, steady, and completely serious. Come and take it. The transmission ended. Commander Thax's face disappeared from the screen, replaced by the view of the approaching fleet. Sir, said Captain June, they're accelerating. It's all ships moving to attack formation. Good, Juan replied. Signal our fleet. All ships, prepare for combat. And remember, we're not just fighting for the Kalari, and we're fighting to make sure these monsters never get the chance to hurt anyone else. The 4 human ships spread out into their own formation. Tiny dots of light against an ocean of enemies. It looked hopeless. But sometimes being human meant doing the impossible. The asteroid field had become a deadly trap. Lieutenant Su watched from his hidden position as the enemy ships approached. For hours, human crews had worked like busy ants, moving space rocks and placing explosive devices in perfect spots. The Draxan fleet came charging in, thinking they would sail through easily. These alien warriors were used to enemies who fought face to face. They expected the humans to line up their ships and fight like old-fashioned knights. Instead, they found themselves swimming into a sea of trouble. Boom. The first mine exploded against the lead ship's hull. then another, and another. The space around them lit up like a deadly fireworks show.
Ow.
Human ships appeared from behind asteroids, firing their weapons before vanishing again into the rocky maze. 3 Draxon. Vessels were destroyed before their crews could even understand what was happening. The alien commanders had never seen anything like this. Where was the honor? Where was the proper battle formation? This was not how civilized races fought wars. Captain June watched his screens carefully. The enemy ships were starting to change. Their approach, they were learning from their mistakes, spreading out and moving more slowly. They're getting smarter, he warned over the radio. They won't fall for the same tricks twice. Commander Juan smiled coldly. He'd expected this. The Draxons were good soldiers, but they thought like soldiers. Humans thought like survivors. Perfect, he said.
At Una.
Send the signal to our friends on the ground. Time to show them what real war looks like.
Ow.
Down on the planet's surface, something incredible was happening. Human soldiers were working side by side with Kalari fighters. These weren't the same frightened aliens who had begged for help weeks ago. Under human training, they were becoming something new, something dangerous. The Kalari had always been peaceful people. They built beautiful cities and created amazing art. Fighting was not in their nature. But humans had taught them that sometimes peace must be protected with violence. Sometimes the gentle must become fierce to survive. Sergeant Min crouched beside a group of Kalari rebels in the ruins of their once beautiful capital. These alien faces, so different from human ones, now showed the same hard determination he had seen in human soldiers. "Remember what we practiced?" he whispered. "Hit them hard, then disappear. Make them afraid to walk their own streets." The Draxons controlled the planet's major cities. But they were about to learn that controlling buildings was very different from controlling people. In the shadows, in the sewers, in the forgotten corners of every occupied town, the resistance was growing stronger. Human advisors had spread across the planet like seeds in fertile ground. They taught the Kalari how to make bombs from household items, how to set up ambushes, how to strike without warning and vanish without a trace. Most importantly, they taught them that even the mightiest enemy could be defeated if you refused to play by their rules. The real war was just beginning. The video feed crackled with static, but everyone could see what was happening. A Draxon warship hung in the sky above a small Kalari town, its massive guns pointing downward. Below, a simple school building stood among the rubble of what used to be a peaceful neighborhood. Inside that school, human doctors and nurses worked frantically to save wounded children. They wore red crosses on their uniforms, the ancient symbol that meant they were healers, not fighters. In every civilized war, such people were protected. They saved lives regardless of which side someone fought for. The Draxon ship fired anyway. Building collapsed in seconds. Tiny bodies were buried under tons of concrete and metal. The human medics who had rushed to help were crushed alongside the children they died trying to protect. It was not an accident. It was not a mistake. It was murder. The recording spread through the human fleet faster than lightning. Every ship, every station, every human in the galaxy saw what the Draxons had done. The images burned into their minds like red-hot iron. Captain June stared at his screen with shaking hands. His knuckles had turned white from gripping his chair. So hard. These weren't soldiers who had died. These were innocent kids, and the brave humans who had tried to save them. "Those monsters," he whispered, "they killed children." Around him, his crew stood in stunned silence. Some were crying. Others looked ready to tear the ship apart with their bare hands. The Draxons had just crossed a line that should never be crossed. Lieutenant Day's voice cut through the quiet like a blade of ice. Every word was sharp and cold. "Commander, I'm requesting permission to activate Protocol 7. Everyone knew what that meant. Protocol 7 was the military's final option, the last resort when all rules of civilized warfare had been thrown away. It meant removing every safety limit, every restriction, every barrier that kept human weapons from reaching their full deadly potential. Commander Juan closed his eyes. He had hoped this day would never come. For all their talk about being warriors, Humans were actually builders at heart. They preferred to create rather than destroy. But when pushed too far, when their deepest values were attacked, they could become something terrible. "Permission granted," he said quietly. "Send the signal to all ships. Tell them the gloves are coming off." The change happened instantly. Across the fleet, human crews began working with a frightening new intensity. Safety protocols that had protected equipment for decades were shut down. Weapons that had been carefully limited were pushed far beyond their design limits. Ships that had been built for exploration were transformed into instruments of pure destruction. Some crews started preparing their vessels for ramming attacks, flying their ships directly into enemy vessels like guided missiles. Others began overloading their power cores, turning their own ships into massive bombs. Engineers worked frantically to modify weapons, making them more powerful than ever before. Even if it meant they might explode, the Draxans had awakened something. They didn't understand. They thought they were fighting another civilized species. Instead, they had just met humanity's fury. General Cole stood frozen on his command deck, watching something that shouldn't be possible. Another human ship had just turned itself into a massive missile, slamming into one of his finest battlecruisers. The explosion lit up space like a newborn star. "This cannot be happening," he whispered to himself. In all his years of conquest, he had never seen anything like this. The humans were using their own vessels as weapons, sacrificing billion-credit starships like they were throwing rocks. The human destroyer, Defiant, had just completed what military historians would later call the most insane maneuver in space: combat. Its crew had aimed their ship directly at the enemy flagship, pushing the engines to maximum power. At the last possible moment, escape pods shot out from the doomed vessel like seeds from a bursting fruit. The Defiant struck the Draxan battlecruiser head-on. The impact was so violent that it created a chain reaction, destroying 2 more enemy ships that were flying too close. 3 massive warships gone in seconds, all because one human crew decided their ship was worth more as a weapon than as protection. "Creatures are completely mad," whispered Cole's aide, his voice shaking. The young officer had fought in dozens of battles, but nothing had prepared him for this. "They're destroying themselves to hurt us." What the Draxans didn't understand was that humans had been doing this for thousands of years. Throughout their history, when faced with impossible odds, humans had always found ways to turn weakness into strength. They had learned to use their own limitations as weapons. On the bridge of the human flagship, Commander Juan watched the battle unfold on dozens of screens. Each display showed another impossible victory. Lieutenant Yuno worked frantically at her station, coordinating attacks that would have been considered suicidal by any reasonable military. "Mira's squadron just lost another ship," Yuno reported. "They're down to 30% power, but she's refusing to retreat." Commander Juan nodded grimly. He had expected this. Captain Mira was one of his best officers, but more importantly, she was human. What's her status? "She's jury-rigged her remaining weapons to overload on command. Says she can take out their supply convoy if she gets close enough." Captain June shook his head, but there was pride in his voice. "That's humanity for you. We never learned when to quit." Across the Draxan fleet, something terrible was happening. Fear was spreading like a disease through their ranks. These alien warriors had conquered dozens of worlds, but they had always fought enemies who wanted to survive. The humans seemed to care more about winning than living. Ship after ship, the Draxans watched their superior vessels fall to tactics that made no sense. How do you fight people who turn their own weaknesses into weapons? How do you defeat an enemy that treats death as just another tool in their arsenal? The answer was simple: you don't. The mighty Draxan Empire was learning what happens when unstoppable force meets immovable human stubbornness. The darkness of space suddenly exploded with light as dozens of human ships materialized from hyperspace. Admiral Park's battle group had arrived, and they brought with them the fury of an entire planet. Every crew member had seen the videos from the destroyed school. Every sailor knew what they were here to do. Well, Admiral Park's voice cut through the static on the communication channels. Even through the crackling radio, you could hear the cold anger in his words. "Looks like we missed the party." Commander Juan felt a surge of relief wash over him. His small fleet had been fighting alone for weeks, outnumbered and outgunned. Now, seeing the fresh ships appearing on his screens, he allowed himself a small smile. Just getting started, Admiral. The Draxan fleet is pulling back to regroup with their main force. The numbers were still terrifying. 20 human ships against 200 Draxan vessels. In any normal war, this would be called suicide. But the Draxans had learned something important over the past few weeks. Humans didn't fight normal wars. Admiral Park's ships moved into formation with practiced precision. These weren't the damaged, jury-rigged vessels that had been fighting desperately for survival. These were fresh warships with full ammunition stores and crews eager for revenge. The reinforcements had brought something else too. New weapons designed specifically to fight the Draxan threat. Admiral came, Lieutenant Sue's voice over the tactical network. I'm receiving a transmission from the planet. The Kalari want to share their shield technology with us. They're offering to help upgrade our defenses. This was unprecedented. The Kalari had always been secretive about their advanced technology. Their energy shields were far superior to anything humans had developed. For them to offer this knowledge freely meant they truly understood what was at stake. Patch them through, Commander Wan ordered immediately. Time to show these Draxan invaders what real cooperation looks like. The alien voice that came through the speakers was different from the frightened pleading they had heard weeks ago. The Kalari had found their courage, and with it, their anger. Human fleet, this is Chief Engineer Zara of the Kalari Defense. Council, we offer our shield technology as a gift. Your people died protecting our children. We will not forget this. Within hours, human and Kalari engineers were working together in ways that would have been impossible just weeks before. The advanced alien shields were being fitted to human ships, while human weapons were being shared with Kalari fighters. Two completely different species, united by a common enemy and a shared sense of justice. The Draxan fleet commanders watched this cooperation with growing unease. They had expected to fight humans, then fight Kalari. Instead, they found themselves facing something new. An alliance born from desperation and forged in the fires of war. The tide was turning. The hunters were about to become the hunted. The sky above the Draxan homeworld was filled with human ships for the first time in history. For generations, the Draxan had been the ones casting shadows over other worlds. Now it was their turn to look up and feel afraid. Admiral Park stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the planet below. It was a dark world, all gray metal. Cities and smoking factories. Everything about it screamed military power and control. But today, that power was broken, Admiral Captain June said, looking up from his reports. The final count is in. We've liberated 17 worlds from Draxan control. Their empire is finished. Park nodded slowly. It had taken months of fighting, planet by planet, system by system. The humans had followed the fleeing Draxan forces across half the galaxy, freeing every world they had conquered. It hadn't been easy. The Draxan fought hard when they were cornered, but they had never learned to fight an enemy that refused to give up. What about General Cole? Park asked. His fleet scattered 3 days ago. Some ships surrendered, others just ran. Intelligence thinks he's hiding somewhere in the Outer Rim with maybe a dozen ships. June paused. Should we pursue? Let him run, Park said. A dozen ships can't rebuild an empire. And maybe running will teach him something about fear. On the planet's surface, something strange was happening. The Draxan civilians had expected the worst when the human ships arrived. Their government had told them stories about how humans were savage monsters who would kill everyone they met. But instead of soldiers with weapons, transport ships were landing with supplies. Sergeant men walked through the ruins of what had once been a Draxan city. The buildings were damaged from the fighting, but the people were still there. Draxan families huddled in doorways, watching the human soldiers with wide, frightened eyes. Set up the medical station over there, Min told his squad, pointing to a cleared area near what looked like a school. Food distribution goes by the main road. Remember, these people are civilians. They didn't choose this war. The Draxan watched in amazement as human soldiers unloaded boxes of medical supplies and food packets. These weren't the actions of conquerors. Right? These were the actions of people who actually cared about helping others. A small Draxan child, maybe, 6 years old, crept closer to where Min was organizing the supplies. The child looked thin and scared, probably hadn't eaten properly in days. Min noticed him watching and smiled. "Hey there, little guy," Min said softly. He pulled out a food packet and offered it to the child. "You hungry?" The child took the packet but didn't eat. Instead, he looked up at Min with confused eyes. "Why?" he asked in broken standard. It was probably the only human word he knew. Min knelt down so he was at the child's eye level. The question was simple, but the answer was everything that made. "Humans different from the Draxan, 'cause everyone deserves to be free," he said gently. "Everyone deserves to be safe and happy, no matter what planet they're from." The child didn't understand all the words, but he understood the kindness. He opened the food packet and started eating. Across the planet, similar scenes were playing out. Human medical teams were treating wounded Draxan civilians. Engineers were fixing damaged power stations and water systems. Teachers were helping Draxan, children who had lost their schools in the fighting. The Draxan government had built their empire on fear and violence. They had taught their people that strength meant hurting others, that the only way to be safe was to make everyone else afraid of you. But the humans were showing them something different. In the capital city, the last of the Draxan military leaders sat in a bunker, watching reports of human kindness on their screens. They had expected revenge, expected the humans to treat them the way they had treated others. Instead, they were seeing their own people being helped by their former enemies. "Right, sir," one of the generals said to the military commander. "The humans are requesting our surrender. They say they'll guarantee the safety of all civilians and military personnel." The commander was an old Draxan who had spent his whole life fighting. He had never surrendered to anyone, but he had also never seen an enemy that offered mercy to the defeated. "Signal the human fleet," he said quietly. Tell them we surrender unconditionally." The age of the Draxan Empire was over. But for the first time in centuries, the galaxy had hope for something better. Elder Vex stood quietly beside Commander Juan, both of them looking out through the massive windows of the space station. Below them, the Kolari homeworld spun peacefully in the void, its blue oceans and green continents unmarked by the scars of war. In the distance, huge ships from Earth were arriving, carrying families and workers ready to build a new life among the stars. The old Kolari leader's voice was soft, almost wondering. "When we sent out that desperate call for help, we thought we were summoning the legendary protectors, ancient guardians who would save us and then disappear back into myth." Commander Juan nodded slowly. The protectors had been a nice story, but stories don't win wars. "No, we definitely weren't what you expected." "Then what were you?" Elder Vex asked, genuinely curious. "What kind of beings sacrifice everything for strangers they've never met?" Juan thought about all the battles they had fought, all the lives lost, all the impossible victories won through sheer stubborn determination. "We were something much more dangerous than legendary heroes. We were human." The galaxy had changed in ways nobody could have imagined. The mighty Draxan Empire, which had terrorized star systems for centuries, was now just a memory. Their conquered worlds had been freed, their victims liberated. In place of their brutal rule, something new had emerged. The Galactic Defense Coalition was unlike anything the universe had ever seen. 47 different species had signed the charter, agreeing to work together to protect the innocent and fight against tyranny. Former enemies now stood side by side, united by the simple idea that freedom was worth defending. Lieutenant Yuna approached with her usual quick, efficient stride. She carried a datapad filled with reports from across the galaxy. "Commander, we're receiving multiple distress signals from the Outer Rim territories. Slave traders are attacking merchant convoys." Juan's expression hardened. The war against the Draxans was over, but the fight for justice never ended. There would always be bullies who preyed on the weak, always be monsters who needed to be stopped. "Signal the fleet. Tell them to prepare for hyperspace jump." As the human ships powered up there faster than light engines, something remarkable happened. Ships from dozens of other species began joining the formation. Kalari vessels with their advanced shields, former Draxan worlds contributing their own warships, and species that had been hiding in fear for generations, now willing to stand and fight. The fleet jumped to hyperspace in a brilliant flash of light, carrying hope to distant worlds that had never known protection. Across the galaxy, tyrants and slavers would soon learn what the Draxans had discovered too late, that when humans decided to protect something, they would move heaven and earth to do it. The stars themselves seemed to shimmer with possibility. Humanity had arrived on the galactic stage, and they had brought with them something the universe had been missing for far too long. The unshakable belief that everyone deserved to be free. The universe would never be the same. The end.